Has Britain gone to the dogs? Have oiks and tow rags taken over our streets? Well, worrying new figures revealed by the Labour Party show that over 90% of crimes are now going unsolved. It's absolutely staggering stuff. Here's what Labour's Jess Phillips said about it earlier.
Criminals have never had it so good because we do not have the capacity in our police forces across our country to properly investigate, to quickly investigate crimes, to take criminals off the street and actually charge them with anything. At the moment, so few criminals are charged and case after case after case, millions of cases are dropped.
Well, the Home Office say that since 2010, crimes including burglary, robbery and theft are actually down 51%, and serious violence crime is down 46%. Policing Minister Chris Phillips hit back at Labour, saying that they are the ones who are soft on crime and criminals. But frankly, few people think the situation is getting better, and you have to wonder if these stats just show that people aren't bothering to actually report crime because they fear the police won't even show up. Well, joining me to discuss this, a former Met Police detective, Peter Bleksley, head of news at the News Movement, Rebecca Hutson, and former Conservative advisor, Leon Emirali. Well, thank you all for being here. Peter, let's start with you. Do we actually now live in lawless Britain?
We're all a lot less safe than we used to be. And why is that? Well, some university-educated senior police officers in recent years surrendered the streets because they took officers away from patrolling on foot, because you know what, they couldn't measure their effectiveness, right? Then, secondly, they came up with a bright idea that people who had watched 2 episodes of Vera could be directly recruited as detectives, and they would end up being competent and really good crime fighters. And of course, that's turned out to be manifestly untrue. And so it goes on, and consequently, the criminals rule the roost. Charging figures are catastrophic, and we need to protect ourselves because the police can't.
Well, the police federations say that this is due to a chronic shortage of detectives. Are they right? Because the Tories claim they've added 20,000 new police officers.
Those same senior police officers detested the CID, detested detectives like me. And what they tried to do, in essence, was cancel it to make it just a job that anybody could do. Well, funnily enough, there's a lot about policing work in general, both in uniform and being a detective, that isn't learned from books. And you need experience, and you need to have worked on the streets to know criminals, to know crime, to know how to engage with people, and to develop your common sense. All of that's been trashed. Policing is absolutely catastrophic now, and I worry for the men, women and children of the UK.
Well, so what is the solution? I mean, have the police just gone too soft? Is this the government's fault? Is it a problem with policing itself?
There's a bit of blame to lie with both, because numbers do matter. And of course, with restrictions on budgets and the like, that's turned the job into a much more challenging thing, and there have been less officers. But also, the senior police themselves have a huge amount of responsibility, because when those budgets were being cut, what did they do? I actually had a debate with a former senior police officer, who now, of course, has a knighthood. Remember, they get knighthoods, damehoods, King's Police medals, OK, for failure. Policing rewards failure. And I said to him, so when all these budget cuts were being imposed, what did you do about it? He said, I wrote a letter. Now, there's the kind of robust police leadership we need, isn't it? Somebody who'll write a letter. No wonder we're all in the shtuck.
I mean, isn't another problem here that people just don't trust the police anymore? For instance, the Co-op have said the government aren't taking things seriously. There have been reports of little packages being sent out to retailers saying, well, if someone's commit an offence in your store, here's how you basically solve it yourself. Do the policing and then come back to us if you think you can catch him.
A mate of mine and his wife run a small sports store, family-run business. They work incredibly hard. 3 weeks ago, 2 organised thieves, because they had clothing specifically adapted to conceal things, went into their store and stole 3 cricket bats worth £1,150, OK? A lot of money to a small independent business. Yeah. The officer dealing with that crime, I should say dealing in inverted commas, OK, who has asked my friends to do all the detective work themselves, works from home and doesn't have a car.
How can the police
so
work from home?
This is what the officer said, OK? And therefore is not able to visit the scenes of crime. Please, everybody, look after yourselves.
But, I mean, there's also been these reports that if someone's nicked stuff that's under 200 quid, it's like, well, don't bother reporting it. Is that the right approach? I mean, is that sort of alleviating the police from a lot of, you know, other duties they can focus on hard crime? Or is it necessary that we really crack down, perhaps in the way that Rudy Giuliani did in New York?
The police have given up on the crimes that affect the moderate majority. Burglary, although some are pledging now to attend burglaries. But see how they take the mickey out of us with the language. They'll attend every burglary. What about investigating it?
Right.
It might just be a box-ticking thing. Burglary they gave up on. Criminal damage, car theft and shoplifting run rampant. They're the crimes that affect us. Even if we're not storeholders, we'll pay more because the retailer's got to make up the losses. The crimes that mattered to us, the moderate majority, the vast majority in the country, senior police chose not to give a monkeys about us.
Becca, where does the blame lie here? I mean, would Labour actually do a better job, do you think, running the Home Office, overseeing the police officers and, you know, putting a stricter policy in place?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're sort of talking about lawless Britain. I think this is kind of austerity Britain, isn't it? We haven't invested in our police forces for a very long time. We also haven't done much to prevent people falling into crime.
20,000 new police officers, apparently.
I mean, where are they? And also, what are the standards for these police officers that are entering the force? You know, we've seen most extreme examples, Wayne Couzens, David Carrick, you know, not the brightest and the best of this country. And I think, you know, as we've lowered standards to increase policing, we haven't increased the standards of policing. So I think they would do a better job. You know, you can't expect a robust police force to man the streets of this country and keep people safe if you don't want to pay for it. And you want to pay for quality officers who are well trained to keep communities safe. And you can't just erode public policing and not expect the criminals to take control of the streets, which I think is what they've done.
I mean, it's the problem here, Leon, actually, that policing is spending way too much time policing speech, policing unpleasant tweets, policing hate crime, and then that's filling up their inbox rather than being able to go out and attend burglaries, carjackings and whatnot.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of that. I mean, I think certainly for a narrative perspective, it doesn't look good when you see police actually, you know, pulling up people for what they've tweeted rather than actually attending violent crimes. I mean, that doesn't look good. But in terms of the practicalities on the ground, I think there is a lack of trust between the public and the police. And yes, it goes to the Wayne Couzens and those types of stories, but also it goes down to the fact that if my home does get burgled, can I rely on the police to show up, investigate, do what they're there to do? And I think if law and order breaks down in this country, when you have that disconnect between the public and the law enforcement, that's a really dangerous situation to be in.
Is it not dangerous, actually, to ramp that particular rhetoric up, Becca? You know, this sort of importation of defund the police and we don't trust the police that may have come from America. I mean, of course, there have been some pretty bad incidents that have been reported, but surely in a civic society it's important that people do trust the police.
It absolutely is, but I don't think that's the British public's fault, and I don't think it's, you know, importing. We don't need to import, you know, mistrust of our police. We're seeing it on our streets every day. You know, trust in the Met Police is particularly low in London because of the things that we've mentioned. You know, the horrible crimes of Wayne Couzens, of David Carrick. You know, the racially implemented stop and search policy. All number of things. Let alone the fact that they don't investigate your crime. You know, your bike is nicked, they don't care. You're burgled, you're lucky if someone turns up. You know, it's the police's responsibility to consent. They have to police by consent, and they are responsible for ensuring that there is consent.
I mean, we threw this out to the great British public based on the fact that new figures show that only 5.7% of crimes were solved by the police last year. We asked people, have criminals been given the green light? And Daisy says, I was assaulted 2 weeks ago and all I got was a letter of support from the police. It's a nonsense. Darryl says something is massively wrong as we are paying for protection we are not receiving. TB, I assume not the disease, said, not surprised. I live by a big police station. It shuts its doors at 7 p.m. Emergency calls only. And I couldn't tell you the last time I saw a copper on the beat. I mean, Leon, is this all about cuts and under-resourcing?
It's definitely a component, but it isn't the be-all and end-all. I think actually there could be efficiencies in the way that we do police in this country. And, you know, talking of importing American-style policing, you know, that makes me a little bit queasy because I think if we go down that route of heavy-handed policing, I don't think anyone wants to see that. That isn't good for anyone. I don't think the police need more powers, but they need to be more efficient with what they've got. And yes, the budgets have gone away. or that they've been diminished, but there are ways in which they can use technology. There are ways in which they can recruit officers that I think we are missing, and that's the key point here. A change of government isn't going to solve this.
I mean, Peter, 96% of people in our poll now believe criminals have essentially been given the green light to run riot. That must break your heart as a former detective.
And they're not wrong. And yes, it does break my heart. Because back in the day, when policing was far from perfect, don't think I'm going to say that, it wasn't. But you know what? The streets were a hostile environment for criminals. That's how it should be.
So what do we need to do?
Robust policing, neighbourhood policing, and not simply butcher
Yeah,
it.
what does that mean? I mean, does that mean that police... Because there's a lot of criticism of the police when it comes to things like stop and search, when it comes to perhaps how robustly they handle suspects.
Dedicated officer to a dedicated beat. That's their patch, that's their beat. They then become known by name. People know how to contact them, recognise their face, know where they might be able to find them, although with so many police station closures, that would be very challenging. And it works. Only recently, up in Cumbria, they started this. A PC called by the name of Steele was dedicated to a seaside beat, and within 3 months, he'd halved antisocial behaviour. It works.
Peter, Becca, Leon, back to you later. Thank you so much, Peter.